Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm the CEO of Nutrition for Longevity, and I'm out here today with our head farm manager, Rachel. And we're going to talk a little bit about regenerative farming. We're here at our farm, Greater Greens, and we're going to walk through the 5 pillars of regenerative farming that we use and practice on this farm. We get a lot of questions. What is regenerative farming? How is it different than just organic farming? And we do use organic practices on the farm. So we use non-GMO seeds only. We don't use any synthetic chemicals like fertilizers, herbicides, insecticides, pesticides. We don't use any synthetic fertilizers. So we're going to talk through some of the things that go beyond that, though, where we're focusing heavily on this farm and regenerating the soil. And why do we do that? Because we believe the soil is the start of everything on a farm and everything to create healthy food. So we focus on what lies beneath the surface to build up a healthy soil microbiome, because we believe a healthy soil microbiome helps build up a healthy gut microbiome and helps us nurture our bodies and creates really nutrient-dense food. What a lot of people don't know is our food studies have shown that our food's lost about 30% of its nutrient content over the last 20 to 30 years. So we're focusing again on regenerating that and creating food that's nutrient dense. A lot of people also don't know that over the last 100 years, we've lost about 2/3 of our carbon stores that used to be held in the soil and now is atmospheric carbon. So sequestration of carbon is all about building up your soil organic matter, building up your soil microbiome so they can sequester that carbon back and capture it back into the soil. So we're actually, as we're farming, you'll start hearing the word more over the next few years, carbon farming, and that's because we're actually pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it back into the ground. So that's a really important environmental aspect of what we do. And it's also about building soil organic matter, which is part of that sequestration, but also it helps us retain water. We can retain about 17,000 gallons of water per acre for every 1% of soil organic matter that we bring back into our soil. And our target is 1 to 1.5% per year in our first few years, so we can really aggressively build our soil back up. The farmland in the US used to have about 11% soil organic matter, and it's now down to on average 1.5% soil organic matter. So if you can imagine how much water we could be saving across the US alone by building up our soil organic matter to even just half of what it used to be. And those are the different things that we're focusing on and the benefits that regenerative farming brings. And we're going to talk again about the specific processes that we focus on the farm that will help regenerate the soil. So Rachel's going to start by talking about composting, vermicomposting, and compost bioreactors, which are 3 different methods of composting we use on the farm. And it's all about building our soil back up to a healthy state.
So as Jennifer said, building the diversity in the soil is very critical here. It's very important. So we do several different methods of composting. We have our thermophilic composting, or just your normal composting that you see, where you mix 70% carbon, 30% nitrogen constantly. We do a lot of our produce in here, especially leftovers from the kits or anything that was cut off from the kits will come right back here and is composted. We also have vermicomposting, which is different from your regular composting because it includes worms, red wiggler worms. So in this bin, I've got a bunch of red wiggler worms. They are eating organic material, same thing that goes into this compost, and they're creating organic matter. When they do that, they increase the surface area of the particles by creating soil aggregates. And that also allows the soil to hold water a lot better than what it was before. So they also put fulvic and humic acid into the soil, and that allows for some nutrients that aren't already soluble for the plants to become soluble, so they can uptake those nutrients a little bit better. Also, it increases the aeration factor of the soil. So we have that, and then we also have our Johnson Sioux bioreactors, which are a very recent way to compost. So you'll take manure and leaf matter or wood chips, and you will put them into this cylindrical structure. And you'll essentially put in these PVC pipes. They allow aeration, so the air goes from underneath here all the way up through it. So it's a static composter. You don't have to turn it, and it will sit for 6 months to a year. We'll take the PVC pipes out, and it'll just allow air to go through. We'll add worms after the initial composting phase, after it goes to up to 131 degrees and then back down. The worms can survive at 80 degrees or lower. They'll go in here, and then the fungal community will start to thrive. So you get a lot more diversity than you would with your other composts, which is mostly bacteria.
And these are, I mean, it sounds really sophisticated compost bioreactors, but it basically is like a mini incubator, and it, like Rachel said, it really promotes the biodiversity in the soil and very aggressive reproduction. So we get a much higher concentration. We use this as an inoculant in our seedlings, so we get a really good start to the year. So we use all three methods. We see that using a diversity of methods also allows us to not just put all of our eggs in one basket, but also to really build up that diversity in the soil, because our farms are really suffering because of monocrops and modern farming, also of biodiversity. And there's so many beneficial microorganisms that we don't even fully understand yet that we're trying to build back up in our soil. And this is one method that we use that's actually fairly inexpensive, and Dr. Johnson and Dr. Sue helped publish this to the agriculture community as an inexpensive way to really create these super inoculants at your farm. So we're really grateful for the research that they've done, and that we can bring it on the farm and start doing it in a pretty expensive way. So yeah, so that's a little bit about the composting that we do, which is really one of the most important things to get our soil going at the beginning of the season. And we have lots of compost piles on the other side of the greenhouse. This is something that we do year round, that really we're constantly putting back into the soil, in addition to the 4 other pillars that we'll talk about shortly. We want to welcome you to our second pillar of our regenerative farming, which is our extended farm family. And this is introducing animals onto the farm. So Rachel's also going to talk a little bit about some of the animals we have. The chickens do produce eggs that we have, but mainly these animals are on the farm to help regenerate the soil. So they're really just part of kind of our extended family, and they do a great job breaking down some of our compost and everything as well. So Rachel's going to share a little bit on why we feel it's important to incorporate animals onto the farm, other than they're great entertainment and fun for us. So we love our farm animals. So maybe Rachel talk a little bit about the benefit that they bring as well.
Okay, so that livestock are an important factor in regenerative agriculture. You may not have the land or acreage available to do cattle or other larger livestock, but you can get down to livestock as small as worms. So to bring a diversity of livestock always helps, because even our gut microbiome is different than Auntie Goat's here. So they all incorporate a different diversity of microorganisms in their manure, and when we're able to mix it all together, we're increasing the diversity of our compost, which just makes it a more resilient soil.
So yeah, we've added the I guess you would say livestock this year. We don't use any of these animals for meat in our meal kits. They're really here to help us regenerate the soil. So they live a pretty good life. They get a lot of our leftover lettuce and spinach. They eat very much a plant-based diet, as well as some of the worms and different insects that they keep at bay on the farm. So they serve a lot of wonderful purposes. They're part of the circle of life on a farm. And a lot of people like to come and visit the animals. So this is step 2 of regenerative farming for us. So one of the third pillars that we have on the regenerative farm is cover cropping. So it's winter right now. We're kind of in the dead of winter. So most of this is dormant, but you can see this particular cover crop we actually left as a overwintering habitat for some of the native pollinator or different species. It is good sometimes to leave and not chop down the cover crops. And with all of our cover crops, we leave the root base in the ground. So we are a no-till farm. Once we establish an area, we focus on leaving the root mass in the ground, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit later because it's one of the other aspects of regenerative farming. But this is sun hemp. This was a mixture of sun hemp, cowpeas, and sunflowers. And it grew very tall. It gave habitat for birds, different insects that we want to build up the healthy insects on the farm. But what these crops also do, and why we do a lot of blends on the farm, is we do test the soil every year. We identify the needs of the soil. Do we need to build up just mainly soil organic matter? Do we need to build up nitrogen in the soil or different minerals and vitamins? So this is one that we did that's a very versatile crop. It's beautiful. It gives a lot of mass and coverage to really build up this soil. And we try to keep the ground covered year round. So you can see this was a path. This was one of our areas that we did yoga on the farm and qigong on the farm and different things around the overall lifestyle that we want to promote for people to connect with nature and connect with the farm. But it also provided, like I said, this incredible habitat. And even the area that we had as a walking path is still covered with wood chips. So we try to never leave the soil exposed. And that's what nature would do if we weren't on this planet and we weren't trying to have dirt here and asphalt here. Mother Nature would still make sure that all of the ground is covered, and that protects the soil, that retains moisture in the soil, that builds up soil organic matter, and that also protects all the bacteria and microorganisms under the surface as well. So cover cropping is one of our most important aspects also beyond composting and adding to the farm. This is one of the things that really helps build up our soil organic matter and helps create an environment that's healthy for the soil microbiome, which is one of our most important focus areas. So one of our additional pillars to regenerative farming, at least on this farm, is we use no-till practices. And what we focus on, so again, we're in the middle of winter. We grow year-round out here. So we have rows that are covered with remay, which just helps as a thermal protection so the crops don't freeze. But you have other rows that are kind of prepped and ready for our spring planting. So on a farm, even though we're in the middle of winter, we're always preparing for spring. That's farming, always ready for spring. That's our time where we can really shine the most. But you can see that this is right here a little bit higher than the ground I'm standing on. I'm in the middle of a walking path. And this is one of our bed rows, and it's prepped. It has a rich compost layer, and now it's covered with some mulch, so it's protected. Again, we try to never leave the soil exposed. And part of the no-tilling practice is once we build this bed, we don't till this ever again. We might do some light aeration of the soil, or we might do some weeding, but we never move this bed again. The other thing that we do is with crops, we'll leave the root mass in the ground. So when we harvest a crop, unless it's a root crop, we just chop the crop and we make sure that we have the root mass. And the reason that we do that is that's where the soil microbiome is concentrated, is around the rhizosphere microbiome of the plant. And that's what we want to keep in place. So we really leave that, and it allows us to build incredible soil organic matter, and it allows us to really build the health of the soil very quickly. And our fifth pillar, again, we're in the dead of winter, but you can get the concept out of it. The last pillar is around our hedgerows and our pollinator habitats. So this is an example of a yarrow row, and you can even see some of the green already starting to come up, even though it's still winter time, but it's getting ready for spring. Yarrow is a perennial. This is a woven row, about a 300-foot row that has rotating purple echinacea coneflower and yarrow, which are two natives to this region. They grow very well, and they create habitat, overwintering habitat for the native insects that are really good for a regenerative farm. So we don't use any synthetic insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. We try to build habitats that do that naturally. So when we build beetle berms or a pollinator habitat like this, it creates environments for native species to grow. And that's really important. A lot of people don't realize we've lost 80% of our insect biomass over the last 30 years. And it's really important to create native habitats so we can start to offset the invasive species, which are taking over a lot of areas, with native species that can rebuild the populations and help naturally protect our plants. Some native beetles can eat about 1,000 invasive beetles in one day. So obviously that can be a very effective way to manage our insects that we don't want on the farm, by using beneficial insects instead. So these are a great crop. They're very strong. They're super low maintenance. They'll completely keep the ground covered year round. So we don't really have to mulch these rows. We don't have to do a lot other than just keep these plants thriving for those beneficial insects. We're right now getting ready to put in a riparian ridge, which is bigger shrubs and trees. So every year we're building up different sections of the farm with different pollinator habitat rows. We try to do these every 10 to 15 rows. So there's these nice breaks with perennials that are building the soil and building habitats as we grow this farm.